camera purchases have gotten weird recently because historically we've had quite a range where if you had like cheap being 100 and expensive being like 3,000, you'd have good stopping points throughout here where like you'd have like a crappy webcam here. You might have like the $400 Lumix G7, which is the camera I rocked for my first year on YouTube. We had lots of different options at these different price points. You could go up to like 1,000 or so and have access to like the Sony like A6400 and cameras like that, and keep going up to different places with different prices. I think this was like 1,000 when it dropped, if I recall. I might be slightly off on that. You get the idea though. We had stopping gaps all the way up to this like $3,000 point where you could get something like the A7S line, which is Sony's high-end like camera line. They're on the 3 for this now, which is, I think it's 3,500 MSRP. You should be able to get it cheaper now. It's old enough, but this is how the lineups used to look. But things have changed a lot. There have been 2 massive changes that have forced us to rethink everything. Change 1 is the iPhone. There's no one iPhone I can point at that I can say, this is the one where the video got good enough. But over time, the iPhone video quality has gotten nuts. For a long time, you still had to deal with the weird sharpness bullshit that iPhones tended to love to do, and honestly still tend to love to do. But now you can shoot Apple log. Apple log, if you're not already familiar with log shooting, you're not deep enough to care this much. Don't worry too much about these things. Log color is a different way of storing color when you shoot so that you're compressing more of the brightness data into a flatter image so you can then bring it out in post. It's using a logarithmic curve for your brightness data and for your saturation data so that you have more room to deal with it in post. If you think of this in terms of like audio recording, it's like compressing the area where the sound is if you had a way to extract the original values out so you have more room above and below. It's not RAW for video, let's be very clear, because RAW is capturing more of the sensor data, and RAW video and log video are different. This is a hack to force more data out of the color for your video. The reason this works is that humans see the gap between dark darks and bright brights very poorly. Close to white and white look nearly identical to us. Close to black and black look nearly identical to us. So if we don't use those very much and instead compress the data so it's more evenly distributed, we have more control of brightness and darkness in post. So most professional video is shot in log, which is why the new iPhone has Apple log. So Apple log is a new option you have on the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max, where it shoots both ProRes, which is a much better quality codec, and also shoots log. Will you actually show it? So here's what the footage looks like by default. It's like super washed out, but you can apply a conversion LUT, which is a lookup table. So it turns every pixel color into a slightly different one based on how you want to convert it. And you can just get so much color out of this. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. Also, I can't believe I'm not subscribed to Teppo on my main channel. He's great. Here it is. Sloppy Steaks is his fucking handle. I love this channel. This is like my favorite second channel of any YouTuber possibly. I love it so much. He has a bunch of videos on this channel that are just rants about the state of YouTube, about the Vision Pro. It's one of my favorite Vision Pro videos by far. But the video I'm here for is his iPhone 15 versus cinema camera video, where he actually goes through this whole video. He built this crazy rig where he could shoot the iPhone and his Sony FX30 at the same time. So he mounted the camera to the FX30 so he could shoot both at roughly the exact same like shot. And through this was able to do a really realistic comparison where you can reasonably compare these two cameras. And the difference is hard to tell. Remember, one of these is a $2,500 Sony cinema camera. The other is an iPhone. What's funny is the reason you can tell which one it is a lot more subtle than most of you are going to think. And it's actually something the iPhone does better. I could tell almost immediately because the iPhone's video stabilization is way better than the Sony cameras. Because the Sony camera's giant sensor combined with Sony's inability to do stabilization, if you look for which one moves smoother, that's the iPhone. So it has to be B because B's actually kind of smooth and A is a little bit more jittery. Yeah, if I recall, I'm almost certain that it was B was the iPhone. Yeah. But how nuts is that an iPhone can actually shoot basically the same video quality that an FX30 can for almost all use cases? It's very hard to justify buying a high-end Sony camera now. Speaking of high-end Sony cameras, let me just add the Apple log especially bit here. Speaking of Sony cameras, there was one other thing that really changed. Everybody's been saying in chat mirrorless, which definitely changed things, but that was generations ago. As I mentioned here with the Lumix G7, we've had mirrorless for long enough. It's not the new change I want to point out. The thing I want to really focus on is focus, specifically autofocus. Autofocus went from kind of a meme to good enough for shooting solo. Previously, you would set a manual focus point, either like the way I would do this, that I have somebody else sit in my chair, or I would put something like a pillow in my chair, go up to the camera, get the focus just right, lock the focus, go back and film and hope everything would be good. But autofocus has gotten fucking incredible. I'm going to risk blowing my entire stream right now by putting this in front of me, watching it get focused on here instead. So now I'm going to be a bit blurrier. And once I put that away, it brings me right back in focus. And this isn't even a Sony. This is a Lumix that's able to do that now. So we're actually at a point now where autofocus is fucking incredible. And if you're shooting solo, which most of the people watching this video almost certainly are, if you're not shooting something else and ever have a time where the camera sits and you're shooting yourself, you need the autofocus to be good. It's not an option anymore. It makes life so much better. The iPhone handles focus just fucking fine. So do almost every Sony camera, which is why Sony's become the standard for a while. But as of recently, so is Lumix. And this was the other huge development that comes in as part of autofocus, is for a while, Sony's autofocus was so good that buying something like a Lumix didn't make sense. And I still now can't really recommend the G7 as much as I love this camera and as much as it carried me. Unless you're willing to deal with the focus stuff yourself, it sucks. And you can't even lock a focus point. Once you have focus locked, if you turn the camera off and on, it resets the focus. You have to do it again. So just incredibly inconvenient for people. A lot of the way I recommend these things is based on convenience. How much is this camera going to get in your way? Because if you're not figuring out which camera you want yourself and you're asking someone like me, you don't actually want to get super nerdy about cameras. You just want to get the video shot. And if you just want to fucking shoot the video, you shouldn't have to deal with things like getting the focus just right and getting the color just right and doing all of this shit. So I cannot recommend buying a lot of the cameras that I used to recommend. And my spectrum here has changed almost entirely. So if we still keep roughly this like same range here, the things I would recommend are very, very different. First, I would recommend in like this range, whatever phone you have right now. Whatever phone you currently have is effectively free, so it'd be past there. Chances are the camera you have in your phone is better than any webcam you can buy. There's basically no webcam I can recommend. The new Mark II of the face cam by Elgato looks like it has good color, which is important because a lot of what these things miss out on is color. And getting bad color out of your camera is so frustrating as someone who's been through it many a time. Phones tend to have much better automatic behaviors with color, so when you just use a phone for video, you're going to be fine. Most Android phones kind of suck at video, to be clear, especially the audio side, but you can get something usable out of it. I would recommend even like an old iPhone over most even modern Android phones, just because the video quality they shoot is shit. The upgrade I would recommend, if you're willing to spend money, so once we get to like the $1,000-ish range, which by the way, if you want to spend between $100 and $1,000, right now my advice is don't. This whole range now is just not worth it anymore. Because if you're in this zone, if you're in this area, you're compromising on so much shit. It's just not worth it. And that's the big issue that I have that made me want to do this, is it feels like everything in the $100 to $1,000 range is so much worse than an iPhone 15 Pro that you shouldn't bother. Because the compromises that a real camera has to make to be in this range are horrible. Then they're always bad. Like, the ZV-1, I think, is the one everybody's obsessed with right now. The ZV-1, oh, it's on sale for way cheaper now. Is this the one that's full frame? Or is it the ZV-E1 that I'm thinking of? Sony's naming is the worst. Yeah, the ZV-E1 is what I'm thinking of. That's not even, it's $2,000. Are you fucking me? How is that legal? Holy shit. It's supposed to be 22. How? This camera overheats in 30 minutes of recording. 30 minutes of recording. It turns off because it has too much heat. And they're selling it as a vlogging camera. That's how they brand it. They put the resolutions it shoots at as like a top selling point. The cinema style inner workings of the A7S. Do you know what else the A7S has? A fucking fan. It has a fan. The E10 overheats after 3 hours usually, but sometimes it's way less time. And once it's overheated, it's not like you just can unoverheat it. You got to wait. Yeah, the whole FX line has fans, which is, we'll get to it. Don't worry. God damn it, Aiden. Yeah. So if you want to spend in this range, stick through with whatever phone you have right now until you can justify the iPhone 15 Pro. The one catch here is if you're filming computer videos, like you're on a computer either streaming or filming off of like your computer directly, it can be really convenient to have a webcam, especially one built into your computer. Using a phone camera with your computer is still not the most stable thing. It's a little frustrating, but it's a thing. You can do it now, especially with the Pro now. You can actually HDMI out on the iPhone 15 Pro. Just get like a USB-C to HDMI adapter, plug that into your phone, and then HDMI out to a computer. That works great. But like the ultimate camera is always going to be a higher end DSLR plus a capture card. That's going to be real hard to beat still. But the fact that the iPhone 15 Pro has all of these professional camera features, like it has really good log shooting on board. It has HDMI, full-size HDMI with an adapter out. It has so much useful stuff around the auto stabilization and balance and auto like contrast and like auto exposure management, where you don't have to worry about any of those things the way you would otherwise. And for whatever reason, they added USB-C SSD recording. So you take this, you plug it in, you plug the other end into an SSD, just a standard USB-C cable. You plug it into your phone, you plug it into an SSD, you go to the camera app, and once you go to video, it just shoots to the SSD now. That's so useful. High-end cameras don't even offer this. Like no Sony camera offers that. All of them have their own weird proprietary like external SSD stuff, or what they usually just do, which is make you buy a really expensive SD card. It's absurdity. So if you want to actually do reasonable workflows around shooting portably on the go, it's basically impossible to beat the iPhone. I say basically impossible because there is one other camera I can recommend. And yes, I know Fuji does recording to SSD, but Fuji's video quality is kind of obnoxious. Also, the USB-C mode sucks. A lot of these cameras that have the USB-C mode built in, don't trust them. I should have went on this rant earlier because I don't know how it's even going to fit. But a lot of cameras now claim they work as a webcam over USB-C. They don't. They might kind of give you like a 720 to 1080p, like 15 FPS to 20 FPS thing. Some might even hit 30 sometimes. But the harsh reality is that converting the signal from a camera to something a computer can use is a tough and expensive problem. The capture card I'm using right now, and I've had to break and fix it a few times, the DeckLink Mini, just for one HDMI in, that's $200 to PCI. The one I have has 4 HDMI ports on it. It's like $700. This is the other capture card I use. AverMedia actually sent me one, and I bought another because I like it so much and rely on it so much. It's a really good capture card. It's quirky because it's a gamer thing, but like this is the money you should expect to spend to get a high quality video signal and convert it to something your computer can use. It's not a cheap problem to solve. It takes a lot of CPU power to do because it's not a trivial task to turn a high bandwidth video signal into something that works over USB. As such, when these cameras do it for you, they're doing it in some crazy sketchy way. Either they baked in a crappy conversion chip for $10, or they're letting the processor that's already on the camera do it, so other parts of your camera start to slow down. Either your autofocus goes to shit, or the actual recording features stop working the way you expect them to, or on a lot of these cameras, you just can't record while you're doing the USB capture. Just sucks. Do not trust the USB capture to computer on any of these cameras. Even the ones that I like Panasonic, I would never recommend using the USB webcam mode. They're just not reliable. I would avoid them as much as you can. And then also the overheating, yes, because it's doing more on the processor, it's even more likely to overheat. And as FaZe points out here, it might drop black frames in too, which might just corrupt your video editor when you're trying to export the video, which is super fun. We've run into this a bunch with random shit. The more you can avoid those types of bugs, the better. And a lot of those come from weird jank features that these cameras add. Yeah, the recent Elgato cards have not been reliable for me, sadly. I have my UVC card right now working with 422 RGB, so that's not necessarily the case anymore. Regardless, you're hopefully getting the idea that these things suck and overheat, and a lot of those features aren't useful or worth using. I highly recommend going over HDMI from your camera to a computer with something like the Elgato Camlink if you want to cheap out and get an older one, or any of the cards that I just showed there. But you need a way to turn HDMI into USB if you want to use this on your computer. Even if you're using it on an iPhone, I would recommend doing it that way if you can. Do not trust the cameras that claim that they work as webcams. Any camera that is a USB port that plugs into your computer is either a scam or going to have a lot of problems. avoid it if you can. Don't trust those features. I want to talk about the other cameras I do recommend though, because there are things better than this that I can wholeheartedly recommend. Sadly, only one company now is the one making these. The Lumix S5IIX is the camera I think you should save up for. The standard S5IIX, which doesn't have the USB-C recording, so that's the feature you lose on the standard model, is $1,800. I've seen this as low as $1,600 and like $1,800 with a lens. This is such an insane value for all the things you get. There's one thing we haven't talked about at all, and I don't even know how in-depth I can or should go, but the idea of sensor size. I'll just full frame versus APS-C sensor. The camera has a sensor in it, which you can see here. That is bigger than that. That's the actual part of the camera that the lens points the light at that then saves it and turns it into an image. Bigger sensors means that it can handle better behaviors with less light, and it also means you can get a wider shot, which is really handy if you're trying to shoot like in a desk situation like this and you don't want the camera to have to be really far away. You can usually get a less wide lens and end up with a much wider shot overall because there's just more light going in on the full frame. You'll also notice that that's not a perfect 16:9. That's a little more square than a 16:9 would be. So here's all the different sensor sizes. 65mm, like the classic film stock, was that big. 35mm full frame. It's a good bit smaller, but that's the standard now for like modern Sony cameras, modern Lumix cameras, the S series specifically. APS-C was smaller. Micro Four Thirds was the standard for a while, which you see is quite a bit smaller than full frame. Micro Four Thirds was great because you could zoom in really, really hard. This was what the first mirrorless cameras were, because when we moved away from using a bunch of mirrors to refine the signal and instead just sent the signal straight to the lens or straight to the sensor, it was hard to do and generated a ton of heat. So we started with much smaller sensors, and slowly Sony managed to build massive ones over time, which is nuts. Really cool. They managed to get up to 35mm equivalents with this. So cool. It's nerdy details that you shouldn't have to care about. Just know you want to go full frame when you can. Most of the time, unless you're doing like bird photography, in which case going with a smaller sensor is actually better because you can zoom in more easily. That's the core point here. I bring all this up because, as I said, usually when you get a sensor like this and you're shooting video, it's going to letterbox you. So you get this section for video. Yay, we get this whole section here. But this area above and below gets cropped out. You lose all this, which is annoying because I paid for this whole sensor. And if I take photos, I get the whole sensor, but I only get the section in the middle when I'm shooting video. For whatever reason, Lumix decided, and Panasonic is Lumix, for whatever reason, Panasonic decided to let you shoot full frame video on this camera, which is nuts because it's a weird resolution, but it's a 6K open gate full frame image. I made a tweet about this a while back. This is why the 6K open gate is so valuable. You can crop a vertical or a horizontal 4K out of it. So good. So good. And the fact that I could shoot once and get a perfectly good vertical and horizontal shot and crop and change it in post however I want on a $1,800 camera, mind you, when there are $4,000 to $6,000 cameras that don't offer any of this shit, is nuts. It's so nuts that it offers this. It's just built in. If you want to really take advantage of that, the files are going to get big, which is why I recommend getting the 2X instead for the external SSD. But I really think it's worth saving up for this camera. If you want a nice camera, and we go back to the diagram, use your phone for as long as you can. Once you're needing something better or ready to go for it, or if you just want to upgrade your phone anyways, grab the iPhone 15 Pro. And once you've saved up enough and you're ready to dive in, Lumix S5IIX. I'm going to put this as $2,200 to $2,600 because you also have to buy a lens, which we'll make recommendations for in a minute. But I wouldn't get any of the things in this range. I consider this to be a kill plane, and I spent a lot of time in here, and it sucked. It sucked so hard. I put so much time in to try and get something in this range that didn't suck, and ended up spending more money on worse things. The mistake I made that I really need to sell, I keep it around mostly so I can make fun of it, to be honest. This guy, the FX30, which they've finally fucking lowered the price on. I don't even know if they intentionally did that. Let's check BH and see what they're selling it for. Yeah. This guy, $1,800. It is obnoxious. You might notice the sensor looks a little small. That's because it's not full frame. Even though Sony's fully moved over to full frame, it's APS-C. So it's a smaller sensor. You can still use the same Sony lenses, but they're not going to look the same because it crops in. So you buy a full frame Sony lens, you use it on here, and now it's zoomed in more than it's supposed to be. It's obnoxious. It sucks. It's so painful. The actual body of the camera felt nice. Like, it's well made for the most part. This handle here with the XLRs on it is like another $1,000. You can't shoot anything other than SD cards and compact flash cards, which is like a weird semi-proprietary thing. I corrupt footage on this all the time. As a reminder, I record for 6 to 7 hours straight, even with dual SD cards with a backup recording on really expensive, like $400 SD cards. I still had recordings getting corrupted all the time. It sucked. It sucked so hard. This thing was miserable. And I haven't even gotten to the hell that was trying to make the color out of it usable, which was hellish. Sony has this weird assumption that you're just going to shoot in S-Log and fix the color later. So there's no way to get good color out of the HDMI port. Meanwhile, on my Lumix, see this color right here? This is zero customization on my part. I think I played with exposure a tiny bit, but barely. I put my white card in front, I hit the auto white balance, and after using it in its default state for a while, I heard the natural color profile was good, so I gave that a shot, and sure as shit, it looks slightly better. Really cool. It's no effort though. I didn't put a bunch of time into getting my color adjusted and getting the tonality and everything just right, because Lumix actually is good at color, unlike Sony. I don't know why people are still recommending a camera like this to anybody, where you're getting a worse spec, a worse experience, worse color, worse overall like integrations, worse IO, worse basically everything other than autofocus, which is very, very slightly better, very slightly. And with the new update on the Lumix, honestly, they've caught up. The only benefit of this is if you already own a bunch of Sony lenses and you're okay with the crop in, fine, grab this, cool. I just don't see any other reason to. Oh, the tally light on the front's really nice. When it's recording, you can tell on the front because of the little red light there. I miss that more than I want to admit. It was very, very nice. It was very nice. But this camera was miserable. Oh, also, if you're stuck in Sony and you need a fan, that's why I got this instead of like an A7 IV or something, because this camera has a fan in it. The only Sony cameras that have fans in them, which means the only Sony cameras that don't overheat, are the FX line, which, yeah, they won't overheat because they have a fan in them, or the A7S line, which to this day, the A7S III has been out for a bit. $3,200. $3,200 for a camera with a worse spec than the S5 II and IIX. You can save $1,000 getting a better camera. I know people who moved off an A7S III in favor of the S5 IIX. Oh, sorry, that's with the lens. Body only, under $2,000. That is possibly the best value in cameras right now. It is stupid how good and how useful this camera is. It's hard to justify anything else. And to go back to my diagram here, the only thing I do in here, being totally honest, better lenses. Like, if you're ready to spend more money, just buy better lenses and lighting and shit. But it's very hard for me to justify anything in between these spots anymore. It's actually weird to put the kill planes in because there's nothing else on any side of this that I would recommend. Basically, my recommendation is simple. Start with the phone you're currently using or the webcam built into your device. Save up until you can get the 15 Pro because it's pretty unbeatable for video quality. And then grab a Lumix S5 IIX if you want a dedicated camera to do dedicated shit. Everything else has been a waste of my time and money. And I am so happy to be shooting on Lumix nowadays. Quick lens recommendations. The Sigma 16mm is legendary. The L-mount version is what I would use because L-mount is what you would use there. This standard 16mm, you'd be amazed how many YouTube videos are shot on this. To be fair, this one's cropped to APS-C, so you won't be able to... Actually, no, I think this one's full frame. I'm pretty sure this one's full frame. It might not be. Yeah, I would confirm this is full frame or not. Even if it's not cropped in, the framing you get with a 16mm is great. A DCDN is crop. Yeah, that's what I thought. DCDN is crop. DGDN is full frame. Thank you to Thomas in chat for confirming that for me. Cool. So this is cropped, which will still look great. For $400, that's a steal. But I'm currently using at my desk downstairs the Lumix 16mm. Wait, no, it's a 24mm is the equivalent. Yeah, the 24mm f1.8 is what I'm using as my main lens in my other room. And then they have a 16 to 35mm that I got for a fucking steal. I got this for like $600 to $700 on sale, which was insane. And this lens is awesome. This is the lens I'm using up here. And I like it a lot. I am annoyed at how good the Lumix S series lenses are. Someone who's owned a lot of different shit. These are some of the nicer pro line lenses I've used. It has no 3, 2, or 1-star ratings. Oh, this one has a bit less, or a bit of those, but I can't imagine disliking any of these lenses. They're all really fucking good. Lenses have gotten so good now that you don't have to worry as much. In the L-mount lenses now, because L-mount's a newer standard, it means there's less cheap crap from older generations floating around to worry about. Generally speaking, when you find a good looking L-mount lens, it's probably going to be a good lens. Oh, there's a Sigma 20 millimeter DGDN apparently. They have a 28 to 70 for pretty cheap, a 35 for pretty cheap. Yeah. Oh, the 24 to 70. That would be like slightly wider version of the lens I was just looking at. 24 to 70 is a really common range for zoom. Yeah, like there are just so many options nowadays. It's hard to go wrong with lenses. Yeah, that is the state of my camera recommendations. I hope this is helpful to the people who are looking to buy new cameras. Hopefully the advice of don't buy a new camera, just justify a phone upgrade is good advice that you'll like. Everybody else, I hope your cameras stop overheating because it's real bad. And we need to stop pretending that Sony's shipping a good experience because they're not. Now that Lumix has caught up in terms of the visual fidelity, now that they're full frame and the autofocus stuff too, it's really hard to shoot anything else. Like it's just a really bad experience shooting on Sony nowadays. And I'm tired of them being the thing everyone recommends. Yeah. Hope this is helpful. Peace, nerds.